You got me super hopeful, man. So that sounds like a really good perspective and prediction, and I hope it comes true.
So you're able to factor in things like time.
Really think about the process, really think about what you're doing, and start documenting from there.
The technology doesn't change your level of accountability at the end of the day, but a machine can definitely do it. Be curious, educate yourself, and learn. This is a technology that's continuing to develop. It is, being used in so many different industry sectors. We're just playing the catch-up game in a heavily regulated environment. So we're just in a matter of time before we take it on in a bit more of a way.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Something new, again, that we're trying to do with this partnership with FinCrime Agent and NFCP. I am again your host, Louie Vargas, the founder of NFCP, and I am joined here by my friend, if I can call you my friend, I hope so, Charmian Simmons. We've, of course, met a few times, have hung out a few times, been on panels, so I'm comfortable calling you my friend. But yeah, we're joined today for what we're calling Tech Talk, episode 1, AI Tech and FinCrime Prevention. So yeah, Charmaine, before we kind of get kicked off and start getting you on the hot seat, can you give our audience, some information on yourself so that we could see that, you're the real star here, not me?
Not a problem. And yes, I would definitely call you a friend. So I'm Charmian Simmons. I am an industry expert in financial crime and compliance. I hold a position in strategy and innovation at a sort of SaaS RegTech company at the moment, Symphony AI. In terms of my background, I've worked at a couple of other RegTech fintechs in the last sort of 5 or 6 years. But prior to that, I've really had a lot of my experience in the financial services sector across multiple risk divisions, working in places like Morgan Stanley in a couple of jurisdictions, so notably New York, London, across all the different sort of risk disciplines. So I do have very much an ex-practitioner view that's brought to how we utilize business process, people, technology as a whole. So great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for that summary. And that's why I always enjoy speaking with you because, the perspective you bring from the plethora of experience you have. And also now, as you said, working for a technology company, it's just super interesting to hear, from your perspective. And for our audience, I apologize. My voice might seem a little hoarse. I have some allergies, so just bear with me. But I promise to do the least amount of talking as I can because obviously we're here to listen to Charmaine, inform us, give us some pearls of wisdom, and all that good stuff. Yeah, so just to kind of lay the groundwork, as an introductory. How would you describe the current landscape in AI? That's a buzzword that we're hearing across the industry, across different industries. So yeah, if you could just kind of give us a flavor on what that is, especially when we're talking about financial crime. And yeah, I know we're still kind of, in this kind of early adoption stage, but what have you been hearing and seeing from your side?
Yeah, I mean, AI is most definitely in the domain of financial crime, sort of on the rise, I would say. The last few years, if you think back to what's really happened, if you have been following what's happening in the market around technology and solutions in this space, you'll see that the techniques, the AI capabilities that are available today have really come a long way in the last few years. If you were to go 5 years, maybe 10 years back, you probably would have seen a lot around different types of machine learning, or you would have heard a lot about robotic process automation, something that would sort of jump you through different aspects of doing automation in terms of how you're actually using technology to help you execute on processes. What we've seen, though, with the advent of the newer styles of AI techniques, largely around predictive AI, what we're seeing now with generative AI, and obviously the next sort of, evolution, I guess, of what we're seeing around large language models, is that jump forward is really much taking us into a really cool R&D kind of phase where we're going in these 6-month increments. And those 6-month increments are showing us that there is a lot of capabilities and skills that we're learning in those AI techniques. And those are actually what's helping us sort of be better at what we're doing and how we're following what the trails of the money is, the trails of the abnormal patterns of things that we're looking for in what we're doing from a financial services or a banking or a third-party risk perspective. Now, equally, criminals, fraudsters, whatever you want to call them, they're just as curious about all the different techniques that we're talking about right now, and they're also using it. So we're still playing a bit of a reactive catch-up game against what they're doing and how they're actually utilizing it. We also know that things like, anti-money laundering is a service. Washing your and cleaning your money is actually a service that criminals can buy. Organized crime groups actually offer this, and they sell it on the dark web. So we're in a very much the same state where we were a few years ago, but I think what we've done is we've been able to close that gap. And that's a really important thing about how we make a difference in combating financial crime.
Yeah, very true. And from a personal perspective, you could see how these technologies are affecting our lives in positives and negatives. But when it comes to our work and what we do, there's, I think, a lot more involved, right? Because you need the proper governance, the proper oversight. So it's not just simply turning something on or working with something. We need to be sure that we have everything in place before we go live with these new innovations, just in case something does go south, or a regulator comes in and asks for kind of what you're doing. You have proof behind it. So yeah, let's take a step closer or a step deeper into kind of these things we're alluding to when you're kind of sharing with us. So, when you think about AI and kind of how it's revolutionizing compliance, but also, what we might hope it would revolutionize. How do you where do you stand on that spectrum? Do you think that it's something that will really revolutionize what we do, or you think it's just kind of the fad at the moment?
Only a quick pause here on the video to let you know that if you're passionate about financial crime prevention and want to advance your career, you must check out my FinCrime Career Accelerator course. It's designed to give you the skills and knowledge to thrive in this exciting field. So find the link in the video description right below, and we are back to the video now.
I think I'm probably a person that's a bit more optimistic. So I'm probably half glass full versus the half glass empty sort of scenario. I think technology is a tool that we use. And at some point in time, there's always going to be an evolution of what that tool does. So maybe it's not a revolution, but maybe it's the evolution that we're going through at the moment. And it is nice that we're into that. And we're nice that we've got a lot of technology, but a lot of R&D. There's a lot of companies investing money into how this actually works. And not only how it works, but in our industry, but in multiple industries. So what that does is it gives me a sense of comfort, a little bit of reassurance that what's happening in the background, how things are being developed, particularly if you're using things like responsible AI principles, from the design to the development to the testing, etc. And that actually does make a big difference. That actually helps us to actually get that comfort. It also helps us to be able to adopt. So while we're sitting there with our risk hat on, we are being very mindful of what things do, what the outcomes are. So therefore, we are looking at, all the different things across that level that we can actually measure to understand, are we feeling comfortable? Is it performing the way we expect it? Is it giving us the right kind of outcome? How do I explain it to my senior leadership team or an internal board or a risk committee, let alone how do I actually communicate that to my regulator? And I know you said, look, the regulators are, being mindful of it. Well, yeah, we're going through an evolution of multiple industries. So whether it's AI regulation or it is AML specific, Secrecy Act type specific type rules and regulations. All of these things are just starting to play into how we're actually looking at it and how we're going to be able to drive an end result. So that's kind of where I sit on the spectrum. I think technology is an aid. It's a tool for us to use, but it's one that can be quite powerful if we give it the chance to.
I think this segues great into the next question I have for you. It's, when you look at financial crime, what types of financial crime do you see AI, especially being well suited to help prevent or give kind of a step up to compliance teams to start using or start thinking about?
If we're talking about the financial crime domain, which is very large, I think probably the best area you can apply it is probably around fraud detection. So think about anything around credit card fraud, or maybe it's sort of, insurance fraud. What we see over time is that getting real-time information or real-time detection can be hard. What we know is that, the way that machine learning works, the way that AI models work is they're constant. They're 24 hours, 7 days a week. So they can continue to churn things through. And as they see and recognize these types of patterns over and over again, they learn what's very much a lower risk, what's very much a higher risk, what doesn't look normal for that particular customer or counterparty. And therefore, they're able to push that information up to front of that queue a lot quicker. So that's a great sort of area that we're seeing in that particular area. Obviously, anti-money laundering is another good one. How do we stop what we're seeing around suspicious transactions? Can we use the right type of technology to help us connect the information that we do know? Is it something that looks maybe a little bit different in terms of that, but I've seen that before? Where have I seen that? How am I relating that information together? Or is that something that perhaps I've got a criminal organization targeting me for 6 months of the year, utilizing this, and then they're going to move on to another institution? How am I seeing what those patterns are and how the frequency is? So you're able to factor in things like time as well, which is something that if we're doing that particular job and that monitoring, it's really hard for us to be able to look at all of those variables, but a machine can definitely do it. I think there's also really good use cases for AI to be used around things like insider trading or market manipulation. There's a lot of things that you can do with natural language processing, the way you're monitoring, comms and chats and emails and that pattern analysis. It's a really good area for it. Synthetic identity fraud is probably another area. So there's sort of a lot of spaces that AI makes a lot of sense to use. And it's simply because of its ability to look at a lot of data, to look at patterns, recognizing bits of information, and being able to use it in a very holistic way. Now, what that is dependent on, though, is data and good quality data. It can't be something that's very fragmented, or things that you just don't really know very well, or you haven't touched, or you haven't cleaned, and you don't understand it. So that comes with a little bit of a caveat. And again, that's going to affect performance and outcomes.
Data. I mean, we keep hearing that. Garbage in, garbage out. So I think I would like to kind of explore the black box of AI, right? Because I think that's what scares most people is, we have this new technology, we want it to do X, Y, Z. How we're ensuring is doing the right thing, how we're ensuring that, we have the right explainability. So I was just wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this all comes down to a few different practices, I would say. One, it's about responsible AI by design. So you're building in that explainability. You're building in the transparency from the get-go. You're making sure there's audit trail and logic that you can follow and, have audited by your internal audit function, or a third party who might want to come in, or a regulator. So there's that kind of an aspect to it. You start from the very beginning, either if you're developing in-house or if you're using a vendor solution. Make sure you've asked the questions. How have you done that? How do I see that information? Is there some kind of a toolkit or a way that I can actually tap into and see what goes on in it? That's part one. The second part of all of that is the accountability. The accountability still lies with the organization and the humans that are owning that particular process. So the technology and the AI model doesn't take away from that. This is something that should be helping you sort of drive that and be able to help you in what you're actually doing. The third thing I'd say about sort of the black box mentality is this type of AI machine learning is not completely brand new. It's not like we've never heard of it. So think about other different areas in, say, the banking sector or insurance, where you've had to look at things like credit facilities. There's been models, or you look at securities trading, you look at high frequency volume trading. That's a very black box in its nature for how it actually trades across different platforms in terms of just trading, on execution. So having a model governance is what I'm trying to get at. These are all practices and things that we've already had in the background. This is not brand new. So the last sort of part I would say to that is it's about the AI model governance. It's about how you're monitoring it, how are you testing it, how are you correcting it if it's doing something. Are you doing any kind of a simulation or measure between how a human would actually do something and how they would derive that outcome versus how the AI model has actually performed? And what kind of an outcome it's giving you. So there's a couple of different things here, but this is not rocket science. We're not starting from scratch in how we're learning this process. All we're going to do is leverage what we're doing. We're just applying it in a slightly different way. And I think that's the really encouraging part about this, is that there's a lot of guardrails that have already been set up, and they're being worked through, and they're probably getting better every 6 months. Every time one of these AI capabilities or skills or techniques change, we're learning a little bit more about how that side of the model, the governance, and how to explain it internally as well as to regulators and other sort of standards bodies. So we're very much in a good state, I think, with there. It's about how much do we understand about it, and therefore how much do we educate our own internal teams about what we're doing and how it's working so that we can actually maintain that.
Yeah, a couple of things there I want to unpack is that, you're 100% right. I mean, there's AI that's already deployed in other parts of your organization, believe it or not. And there's probably, I'm hoping, we could say 99% sure there's governance in place and there's documentation around it. So when you're let's say in the compliance space, you should be looking toward, your partners in the other parts of the institution to help guide you in this setup. If you're listening to us from the EU, the EU has an AI Act. So there's some also guidance there where, there's some expectations. They're not telling you exactly what to do, but there's some guidance there. The US, I think they're still trying to figure things out, especially with the Trump administration. I believe that's been kind of deprioritized at the moment. And the UK, I'm not sure if they've done anything on that. Charmaine, I know you kind of sit in London. Have you heard of the UK doing anything specifically on
The
AI?
UK has a principles-based type of an approach. So there's either the letter of the law in terms of regulation rules is principle-based when it comes to this.
Okay.
And that's sort of the UK's approach to it. Now, they are trying to be, a top leader in AI. The top three countries at the moment are US, China, closely followed by, the UK in terms of AI innovation. But in terms of the regulation, they're probably a lot of a step backwards because it's principles based. And it's not sort of federal across multiple jurisdictions. There's no level setting between all the different countries or some kind of a global way of dealing with it. So that adds another layer, I guess, of, obscurity to how an organization wants to implement. So, but what we do know is that the EU AI Act is probably the most comprehensive. And just remember, it's not just for financial crime or just for financial services. It goes across every industry sector. So it's covering things like, healthcare and as well as like machinery, automotive, we're covering everything. So the way that we take that on board and apply it is a little bit different.
Yep, definitely, for sure. And and just going back to kind of the comments you made before that, it's not rocket science, that, we have to start, from the beginning and kind of have it grow in each kind of process step. I think that was a really good thing to call out because, and as you mentioned, there's a difference between creating something in-house or just, buying something, a product. But I think that's a good thing to keep in mind for those that are listening is because, they have to think of these things, take a step back, really think about the process, really think about what you're doing and start documenting from there. Because where we see a lot of problems happening, and not just in the technology space, but just in kind of run-of-the-mill kind of topics is that you try to start at the end game and back into it. And if sometimes when you try to do that, you end up missing a step or forgetting something. So I think, what I always like to say is start with the fundamentals, start where the beginning is, and then kind of see where you go and where you branch off, because at the end, hopefully, you've covered all the bases. And, something we've always, we always harp on is that, it's the who owns the risk is, the business. So they have to know what's going on. They can't just say, we have a tool and it does what we need it to do. No, that's not how it works, especially
Yeah, the
like with
accountability still sits. The technology doesn't change your level of accountability at the end of the day. It is an aid for you to achieve what you need to, but the accountability still lies
exactly.
there.
And if anything, I think if that's a main point for people to take home today, who's watching this and listening in, is that the accountability still stops with the person, with the business area, with the company. It doesn't, you can't just release it, everything to the technology and say, well, it's doing it on my behalf, and I don't care what it does or how it does it, it's doing it. No, you have to be part of that process and really understand what's happening. Um, Especially when a regulator comes in, because they're not going to want you to hand them over a manual from the tech provider. No, they want to hear how you explain how it's happening, how you understand it. Because if you're unsure, they're going to start digging for more bones in the closet. So
I
please,
think that's an
you know.
interesting point there too, is that the way that if you think about like generative AI right now,
Mhm.
the way that a lot of the generative AI comes is there's sort of a pre-trained model that you
Mhm.
almost use. So it's a very specific sort of, something that's got a foundational model and it's got a bit of a proprietary model that's learned something. Then what it does is it goes into your environment and it starts learning off your data. So, Louie, your organization's data and my organization's data is not exactly the same. We have a different risk appetite. We have a different set of customers. We have a different set of products that we offer. We probably have a different level of an individual versus a counterparty versus a business or whatever else, right? All these different factors. But it's going to learn off your data and how you treat different things. So the fact that it is doing that means that you should understand what your models are doing. You should understand how you're governing. You should understand and recognize what the outcomes are going to be. And you should be monitoring and course correcting where it needs to be to ensure that you get that right kind of thing. Now, none of this is rocket science. So like I said, this is all stuff that's already been done before. All we're doing is giving a particular technology capability that allows you to execute in a different way against what that objective really is.
Mm. Well said. And now I kind of want to pivot to something where, you raised before, where we need data, clean data, the right data. So jumping into the next question around that is, as you also mentioned, AI models rely on data. That's how they learn kind of what to do or what to suggest. So with that in mind, how are institutions, or would you suggest institutions manage the quality, the GDPR concerns and the governance around the data that it uses in their systems?
Yeah, so data is pivotal for how all of this is going to work. So those organizations that have probably already started doing some kind of a data cleansing or some kind of a transformation program over the last 5 years, you're probably already ahead of some organization that hasn't. So that's probably part one. Part two, about managing sort of quality or, data privacy concerns, it's about whether or not you're using these models for internal sort of purposes and you're keeping it there. You're not allowing it to, go external, and you're not putting in information into a third-party tool like ChatGPT or Gemini or something out there where you're putting in customer information. So you shouldn't be doing that. That's just a good best practice, right? We talked about those guardrails before. There's guardrails for the technology and the models to use, but there's also guardrails for the users at the end of the day to ensure that they're not, going against what should be set as best practice. So there's that part of it. If you are allowing some kind of a model to go out, so let's say you've got you're well and truly into using generative AI and you're using it from a natural language processing perspective where you can interact with it, plus you're now using more of these AI agents. They're the things that go one step beyond what a interactive sort of digital assistant can do. It's very much a digital worker that can make decisions. It can go out there and pull stuff off the internet for you and bring it all back in. As long as you're giving it that and you're giving it some guardrails about what it can and can't do externally to bring that in, and it can't provide any information around, PII, all this type of stuff, you test that before you actually put it into your production environment. So same kind of thing that you would normally do with any other kind of, promote to prod type of product. You do the same with what this happens. So the controls that we've got in place are very much the things that we already know of. Again, this is not we're not starting from scratch, if you know what I mean. But all of this does come down to what your data is, how well you understand your data, what governance do you have over the top of it to make sure you're using, say, a single source of truth, or if you are sitting across multiple jurisdictions, can you touch what's in there from a Chinese law perspective, or how do you share or utilize that information? So you have to be able to put some toolkits in place and then some frameworks that would say this is what you can and can't do. And that's where I go back to saying that you can get a pre-trained model, but you also train it on your data. So you train it on your policies and your procedures about what you allow it to do. And I think that's a misconception out there, that everyone looks at ChatGPT, or they look at Gemini, or look at Microsoft's Copilot, and they just go, oh, we'll just put anything in. Well, in theory, yes. But in practice, because we very much sort of risk averse, we're curious, but we're very much, holding our cards, to our chest. We have that sort of discipline already in us from what we do in a sort of a risk domain already. So these are some of the things that actually aid us in taking that adoption, and therefore understanding what our data is and understanding how we're going to maintain quality, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, well said. And I think just to piggyback on that, because we talked a bit about regulators and how they might perceive things or have questions. So yeah, just to kind of expound on that a bit, do you feel, or from what you've been hearing, are they keeping pace with AI adoption, in financial services, or even more broadly? Or do you think there's still a gap that needs to be addressed? I mean, you've already said a few times, this is not rocket science. We have already the framework in place. We just have to now adopt it, move forward, and try these things. Do you think the regulators are on board with that? Do you think they're ready, or they're still kind of a learning curve?
I think that depends on which regulator you ask, I think. So what we've noticed, having had conversations with regulators around the world, is that some are a lot more open to using the technology than others. And some of the reasons for that is that they feel a bit more comfortable about it because they themselves are learning about it. So what they're doing is they're engaging with the industry. Not only the industry in terms of the financial, services sector itself, but also the type of tech vendors. They're also going out to the big tech companies, like Meta and Google and whatever else. They're having those conversations to better understand and educate themselves. I know I've done some training sessions with a couple of regulators where I've taken them through how AI gets used, what kind of models we do, how do we actually develop it from the ground up, what do we do in terms of the governance, what do we do when it starts to have things like data drift, how do we course correct? So we are as much educating them as they are, coming in to do supervisory stuff and asking the questions of us as an industry. So it's a bit of part and parcel. Now, there are certain regulators that you said before, look, they haven't even accepted things like cloud computing yet, let alone something like an AI to drive and be maybe autonomous in these type of environments. So it's very much sort of you've got to engage with your regulators to understand what they're thinking, what they know, and how do you take them on the journey of that AI sort of maturity model that you're going on. That's pretty much the same as what you've probably done if you have ever been, under a particular MOU, or you've got, MRIAs or something from a regulator. You have to talk to them about what you're doing and what mitigations you're putting in place. This is the same kind of a thing. Again, we understand these processes. We understand how these things go because we're comfortable and familiar with them. But this is more about what is the adoption and what does it look like, and how are we taking things on board, and is there a return on the investment? Am I getting what I want out of that AI at the end of the day? And therefore, how am I utilizing either my time, my people, or my costs in a better way that I can redeploy them to do something differently, or I get a better outcome if I move them to higher risk areas, or. So yeah, it's a bit of give and take, but on a whole, I think there's some regulators are very good, some regulators are very bad, but take them on the journey and educate them. But at the same time, probably my biggest tip is if you've made it to this part of this webinar, well done. This is about you educating yourself in what AI does in this industry, and this is how you spread that around your colleagues, around your teams. You get better knowledge and know-how of how it actually operates.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Charmaine. I agree when it comes to regulators, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some are more guarded with their sharing their thoughts, and some are a bit more open to having these conversations with the industry. As you said, not just the financial industry, but the tech companies themselves. I've seen some of this in Denmark, where the local FSA has a sandbox where they work with these different kind of companies so that they have the ability to learn and not really give them a stamp of approval, but at the end of kind of their sandbox experience, there's a report that gets published that doesn't release any IP information. So companies are not worried about that, but just kind of states kind of what they were testing, their comfortability around it, and stuff like that. So now that gives other companies within, I guess, Denmark, that ability to read those reports and say, okay, I learned from it a bit before they start getting too far down the trail. So yeah, now we're going to start wrapping up this webinar, and I guess kind of leading into what I love is the key takeaways. What are you giving people, right? The goodie bag. Before we get there, is when you look at AI, especially in financial crime, what if you had a crystal ball, what does the next 6 months to 12 months look like in this space? I guess good or bad, right? Do you see us see more adoption? Do you see the criminals kind of still running away with things? Yeah, just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think what we've seen a bit of a slowdown in terms of AI adoption, particularly in the middle part of the year, where people are trying to work out what to do with their budgets, where do they go in terms of how do they upgrade or what do they buy next. They are waiting on regulatory's views as well and the expectations that are coming down. So for the next 6 months, I would probably say we're looking to see a bit of an uptick in AI adoption as part one. I think going along that sort of AI maturity journey and that curve is actually people are starting to recognize what that is, and that's a good thing. The second part of thing that I would say there in terms of what's happening in the next 6 months from an R&D perspective, the direction of travel is really taking that generative AI and sort of exploding it out into how it becomes more sort of autonomous. How do you create something that can, downplay a lot of the manual work that has to be done, the collating of a lot of the information, where it actually makes a decision at the very end of the day is very key. But it is doing a lot of the functions and therefore taking away that manual side of things. Now, the development of that has been, quite big in terms of the jumps. I think in the next 6 months, what we're going to start to see is sort of a whole pile of almost like AI workers, AI agents, being able to work in an ecosystem. So you might have something that has a very particular, skill set that can get used across fraud, it can get used across transaction monitoring, it can get used across, say, a quality assurance. And maybe that's like its quality as a researcher, or maybe it's a quality assurance assistant, or, maybe it's something else. But there's these types of things work together. And I think that's the sort of future direction of travel. And we're only going to start to see more and more of that being talked about. What it means is we need to understand what those risks are. But what it should also mean for those in the, criminal sort of world is that we're starting to catch up to them. So what they're using in this particular, world to create their profit-making little businesses, we're catching up. We're going to start to spot where they're doing things that are utilizing the technologies that we're talking about today to sort of circumvent the controls and sort of the weaknesses that we've got, the vulnerabilities in how these systems run. And remember, banks are a world of processes, controls, a bit of bureaucracy built in. We have to work our way through that. The criminal organization doesn't. They'll just bypass that and railroad over it. But we're making a lot of strides going forward in that. And I think what's happening in sort of the AI agents world will actually do that. So, keep your eye on that for the next 6 months.
You got me super hopeful, man. That sounds like a really good perspective and prediction. And I hope it comes true. Not only for your current employer, but just for us in the space, because it's been a long time coming where a lot of us are still waiting for tools and waiting for help.
Yeah.
but that kind of outline sounds really promising. So I really hope it comes true. Um, you've mentioned R&D a few times, and my understand just in case of people out there don't know what that is, my understanding is that means research and development. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, research and development.
Got it. So just want to make sure anybody's out there is like, what is that about? Yeah, there it is. That's the definition for that. There was more acronyms that Charmaine spoke about. If you don't know about it, reach out to us. We'll define it for you. Um, but yeah, we don't want anybody to feel like, kind of missing certain pieces. We want this to be fully, absorbed because there's so much pearls of wisdom being shared today. And as we talk about pearls of wisdom, the way I like to wrap up every conversation I have, it's kind of, what are the one or two key takeaways that you would like to share with exploring AI, especially in the FinCrime space? And yeah, like kind of what would that be that you want people to kind of keep in mind as, we're getting into the brave new world?
Okay, two things I would say is be curious, educate yourself, and learn. That's part one. This isn't going away. This is a technology that's continuing to develop. It is, being used in so many different industry sectors. We're just playing the catch-up game in a heavily regulated environment. So we're just in a matter of time before it, we take it on in a bit more of a way. So continue to be curious, ask questions, engage in these types of forums, go to conferences, learn a little bit about it, watch some YouTube videos. There's a lot that you can just pick up and learn and understand along the way. The second sort of takeaway that I would say is talk about it with your colleagues, find out what your organization's doing around AI. How are they approaching it? It's a topic, again, that's sort of going in lots of different directions, but understand how your organization's doing and understand what the industry and the market's doing, because there's a lot of stuff going on. The research and development, the R&D, what we're seeing being pushed out to the market that's proven, as opposed to that's a nice to have, or some vendor has written something or other, but look, we already do that really well using this technology. What makes the most sense for your organization? So it's about taking that step back. If you are in more of a senior role that plays a part in how your organization actually makes these decisions around technology, or how do you improve effectiveness and efficiency, ask those questions, look into what actually will help your organization do better in what you're doing. Think about how you measure success for your organization, and is technology a good way for you to employ to actually achieve that goal?
Wow. So there we have it. So, as we say goodbye, I really want to thank you again, Charmaine, for joining us. This is episode 1, and we have a few more to go in the series. So, those, I guess I would be remiss to not mention that. Please reach out to FinCrime Agent, Marco, myself, NFCP. If you have any questions for Charmaine for the next episodes, obviously we could come up with them. There's a lot of interest we have on it. We're nerds about this, but we want to hear from you. This is all about the community. So if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We'll share them with Charmaine, and we'll address them in the next episode. Also, if you just want to reach out to us and tell us hi, you have an offline chat, that's great as well. So all that to say is, we're here for you. We're here for the community. So, please reach out to us with any questions that you want us to address in a future episode, or just want to connect on LinkedIn. But yeah, any last words before we let you off the hot seat, Charmaine?
I would say stay engaged and let us know what you want.
Awesome.
See you in the next episode.
Yeah. See you in the next episode. Thank you very much for joining. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, everyone.